I have been thinking of thoughts and feelings in terms of objects that appear on the blank screen.
That's an intermediary and lower level of understanding.
Okay.
For
I
one,
got it from you, but I obviously am...
No, I often use that intermediary lower level of understanding in the early stages of the investigation. For one who, let's say we were to ask most people, what does your experience consist of? And let's say that they've explored their experience sufficiently to say my experience consists of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, rather than a body, a house, a chair. They've explored their experience enough to say all I experience are thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. That's the sum total of their experience. So to that one, I'm not going to start talking about the one to them. No, okay, so I'm going to start where they are. Okay, that's true. You have thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. Now ask yourself the question, all of these appear and disappear. Yeah, they agree. Anything that appears and disappears must appear and disappear in something. What do they appear and disappear in? So now we're drawing attention to the fact of consciousness. Previously they just thought there are thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. Now they realize, there's a medium within which thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions appear. So at this stage of understanding, we now have thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions as objects appearing in consciousness. It's a legitimate step. We've gone one step from there are only, let's just call it thoughts and perceptions. It's easy. We've taken the step from there are just thoughts and perceptions. The next step, there are thoughts and perceptions appearing in consciousness. That's a valid step, and you got it from me in the early days. But then, as always, as soon as we've made a statement in the teaching, we then move on and contradict that statement. So it's true in relation to the previous belief, but it's not true in relation to the next stage of understanding. So then we say, okay, let's look more closely at these thoughts and perceptions appearing in consciousness, like fishes appearing in the ocean. You go into a thought. Do we ever find a discrete object called a thought, like a fish in the ocean, that you can pluck out of consciousness and say, look, here is a thought. Take the thought, what shall we have for dinner tonight? The what sounds in your mind. Where is the shall we have for dinner tonight? It's non-existent. And when the shall appears in your mind, where is the what? And where is the we have for dinner tonight? It's non-existent. So we never experience the whole thought. We experience understanding, but never the whole thought. A thought is a process of thinking, not an object. So we realize, no, there are no fishes in the ocean. There are currents and waves. There are no thoughts. There is a process of thinking. But even that, so as soon as we say that, that's true in relation to the previous belief. There are thoughts. Now we say no. That there's thinking appearing in the ocean of consciousness. And then we go closer. But okay, touch the stuff that thinking is made of. Thinking is not nothing. Something is there. And if you are experiencing it, you must be experiencing the stuff it's made of. You can't watch a movie without seeing the screen. So you're thinking, okay, touch it. When I say touch it, I mean experience. Don't just think about it, experience it. What is it made of? What's there when you touch thinking, knowing, consciousness? So that there isn't even thinking. There are no fishes in the ocean. There are no actual currents in the ocean. There's just the water.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. That's really helpful. That took me to a new understanding.
Okay, good. So you see that there are, each of these states, there are thoughts. That's a legitimate stage of understanding. I use it. I haven't used it this week because we started on day, and I very, very rarely use it now. I used to in the early days. We'd always start with, there are thoughts and perceptions. There are thoughts and perceptions appearing to consciousness. There are thoughts and perceptions appearing in consciousness. We used to go step by step. Some of the old timers remember those days. I don't need to do that anymore because you're all so mature. You've done your homework on YouTube. So here, we just start on the top of the mountain and then we take off. And very occasionally, if someone's here for the first time, they only heard about these matters 2 weeks ago, then I might say, okay, let's talk about thoughts appearing in consciousness. But this week we haven't needed to, because none of you have asked me to. It's quite evident that none of you need me to do that.
Well, I just did, and so
Well, okay.
I really do appreciate your answer, though. That is really helpful. So now I feel like I'm maybe have a foot on the launching pad, and I'll play with that. I'll definitely investigate that and play with it. So thank you.
Okay. The nature or essence of your mind, or the nature or essence of anything, is that aspect of that thing that cannot be removed from it. So the nature or essence of the mind is consciousness. So what is the relationship between consciousness and language and thought? Language all languages are contained in potential within consciousness. When consciousness assumes the form of any language, it is the language that conditions the mind. The language, it is a conditioning, a blueprint in the mind that conditions the way the mind conceives of reality. So our language is a language of diversification. Our language divides reality into a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves. But it's not impossible that a language couldn't develop. Indeed, the Sanskrit language is a language that is less divisive in its nature.
What are thoughts?
Thoughts are a series of abstract sounds that by association we have agreed to refer to certain ultimately arbitrary and conceptual categories of experience, as Phil said a couple of nights ago. The fact that we call this a glass, we have just arbitrarily halted what is in fact, as Dean said earlier, a flow of experience. We never actually find the solid object. We never find a noun. It is a verb. But an object is a conceptual, a cut in the flow. And we said this is an object. It's a thing. So language is the means by which we divide up the one reality. And in fact, language extracts objects from the seamless. In other words, an object. We don't think about an object because the object exists. The object seems to exist because we think about it.
Right.
We think the object exists first, and then we think about it. No, it's the other way around. It's thinking that extracts the object from the seamless, infinite whole. And then we forget the fact that thought has extracted this arbitrary category of experience called the object, and we attribute the reality to the object itself, rather than realizing that it is actually thought that has imposed its own limitation on the infinite reality and made it appear as an object. So we don't think about objects because they exist. They seem to exist because we think of them.
And our perception of the glass would be very different without the language applied to it, I guess.
Yes, because it's language that extracts a separate, a discrete and independently existing entity called a glass from the whole. It's only language that does that. In the absence of that language, there are no nouns, there are no objects. It's just verbs. It's a process, not an object. So imagine a process that has no beginning and no end, and imagine the universe as the activity of consciousness, just consciousness and its activity. That's all there is, consciousness and its vibration, its activity. One of its activities is called thinking, and it is thinking that extracts from that activity an apparent object. There's no real object there. It is thinking that extracts a discrete object from the flow of its activity.
Right.
To use this example, take a wave on the ocean. Where does a wave on the ocean start and stop? Can you look at an ocean and say, look, this is the ocean, and this particular wave that's rolling in now, look, it starts there and it stops there. But no, we never see the discrete, independently existing object, the wave. The wave is just an abstract conceptual category that allows us to talk practically about the wave for practical purposes. But there is no actual wave. There's just one ocean. The ocean isn't divided into waves and currents. So waves is just it's thought that abstracts the wave, that thinks there is a wave on the ocean. No, there are no waves. There's just the ocean and its activity. And the activity of the ocean is one thing. It's always only one thing. It's thought that says it's many waves and many currents. Those waves and currents, we never actually find the currents. We don't think about waves and currents because they exist. They seem to exist because we think about them. Well, imagine consciousness as a vast ocean whose activity is the universe. There are no waves and currents in the universe. There are no objects and selves in the universe. There's one indivisible flow. Just verbs, no nouns. It's thought that extracts, and thinking is one of consciousness's activities. But through the activity of thinking, abstracts discrete objects from this seamless flow. Well, there are no objects. There are no people. There are no selves. There's one infinite, indivisible whole.
I'm not thinking these thoughts. They're just coming. And the personal self wants to take credit for the thought, but the thought just arises spontaneously in my field. It doesn't matter what thought it is, it just comes up. So my question is where do thoughts come from? Because they don't come from the personal self.
Yes. When you say that the personal self wants to take credit for the thoughts, you imply that there is a separate self that wants to claim. No, the separate self is itself a thought.
Right.
Just as the thought abstracts an object from the seamless flow of experience, the same process of thinking abstracts a separate self, and then says the separate self claims the thought that there is no separate self. The separate self is created, or rather imagined, through thinking.
Yes, I understand that, I think.
So where do thoughts come from?
So I can be...
From where everything comes from, out of consciousness.
Thank you. That was even just sitting in being.
It's not... Go on. Sorry. I thought it came to me. Carry on. I'll...
No, that's all right. I want to hear your answer. I think you anticipate.
I was just going to improve, just being a dissatisfied Zen master wanting to improve, having noticed his mistake. When I said thoughts come from consciousness, as if consciousness were their source and thoughts somehow come out of them. No, Nothing comes from consciousness. Nothing comes out of consciousness. Nothing exists. Remember, ex, sistere, to stand out from. Nothing exists. Nothing stands out from consciousness. A thought is just what consciousness looks like when viewed through the narrow lens of a finite mind at a particular moment. All things possible to be believed are an image of truth. The thought is just an image of consciousness. It doesn't arise from consciousness. Nothing arises from consciousness. It's just an image of consciousness.
So as we sit in being, and we're empty, and a thought or a feeling arises, I can watch it arise from the center of my being. And it could be habit, it could be conditioning, but it doesn't exist. The personal self doesn't exist, but I am trying to go back and find the source of the thought, and maybe that's just a waste of my time.
But you see, the reason ultimately you're having difficulty is because you're looking for the source of something that doesn't exist. Well, that's why you're frustrated.
So
as a concession, we can say, yes, the thought arises from consciousness, but that would suggest that there is a thought. Okay, to one who believes that there really is an object or a self or a thought, we can say, yes, the thought exists. It arises from consciousness. It exists in consciousness. It dissolves. That's a valid concession, but we're way beyond those concessions here. There is no thing called a thought. A thought is a subtle object, a mental object, that is imagined by thinking. Thinking is a process, not an object. What is that process? It is the activity of consciousness. It is consciousness itself that takes the form of that activity. There's no object there called a thought. There's the process of thinking. And if you touch the stuff that thinking is made of, all you find is knowing or consciousness.
Since Tuesday, the awake whilst asleep has sort of created a verb world. These last several days, all verbs, just everything is a flow of verbs. And you say you carry your father's handkerchief sometimes. So this morning I was walking, and I had my mother's scarf, and always since my mother has passed, I've never felt she was anywhere but here. And it wasn't just, oh, you're living in my heart. Like here, not speaking, like, oh, I hear my mother's voice, but much more here. In something I'm looking at, or in a ray of something that's in the grass, or just very, very present. And so this falling away of space and time as an understanding that, again, these appearances that are not even appearances of everything simultaneously. It's just one simultaneous activity is really there a lot. And this idea of there's just, again, no such thing as death. There's no such thing as death. It's one thing to say, there's no people, these are appearances. Okay, but if there's no such thing as death, how does all the activities of the world start to reorganize themselves in one's daily life? Like, I'm having the experience of me, and I'm also having the experience of me at 10 or 15, and they're all there.
Yes, you're right. The idea of birth and death is a rather primitive idea. in order to say that this is an object, in order to say this is an object, as I said earlier, thought abstracts the discrete object. It's only once that has happened that we can talk about the object starting and ending. If I was to drop this glass and it was break, we'd say the object, the glass was no longer a glass, it had ended, and when it was made, it began. But we have to first conceptualize the discrete object before we can attribute a beginning and an end to it. It's the same with a person. A person is an arbitrary conceptual category, a necessary one, but when we're really speaking about reality, the person never has its own discrete, independent existence, and therefore cannot be said to have a beginning and an end, because the object, the person in this case that is supposed to begin and end, is just an arbitrary extraction in a seamless flow of experience. So the idea of birth and death is as primitive an idea as the idea of the beginning and the ending of an object. It's valid, of course, to speak about life and death, but at the kind of level that we've been speaking this week, that life and death, birth and death, they don't pertain. Sorry, say that again.
That disassociative appearance of the glass is really happening. Like it's just like your father's handkerchief. You don't have to look at your father's handkerchief to feel your father right here in the room. So why do you carry the handkerchief? Why did I wear, what like I left my mother's shawl out there this morning. It's like, bye-bye. I don't need the shawl. Someone else might like it. It's a very pretty shawl.
Because it's true. You're right. I don't need my father's handkerchief to remind me of my...
I'm not saying I'm not being disrespectful.
No, I don't feel you are at all, Janet.
Okay.
It's a perfectly valid question. You're not being at all disrespectful. And you're quite right. I don't need his handkerchief or indeed his image, if I have, of him in my study to remember him, because he's never far. He's always in my heart, and the memory of him is very alive in me. But it's just sweet to carry his handkerchief in my pocket. It's just sweet. It's just a little private thing I do. It's just sweet.
It is sweet. I left her scarf
It's
out there.
sweet.
But
I have his photograph on my mantelpiece in the study. I turn to him and smile. I mean, it's a silly little kind of childish ritual that I do, but it's not silly and it's meaningful to me. I sometimes speak out loud to him.
Right.
Of course, it's silly. I don't need to do that. It's sweet.
And do you feel like it's a memory?
It's a ritual. It's a ritual, and rituals don't bear rational scrutiny.
That's what I meant.
The rituals are supposed to just deliver. If they don't deliver, don't do them, but don't analyze them. Don't ask me why I carry my father's handkerchief. If you don't understand why I carry my father's handkerchief in my pocket or why I have an image of, well, I'm sorry, then I can't explain. Understand?
No, I do understand. And at the same time, I felt like it was so clear today that I left it. I left it, and I don't know, I'm curious. It's curious to me, the whole falling away of what we perceive to be this horizontal understanding of our experiences.
It doesn't, because of this understanding that there are ultimately no objects, and ultimately there are people. The consequence of this understanding is not that we no longer value objects, and even less, I'm not implying that you think this, and even less that we no longer value people. It's rather the opposite. We value objects more. We value people even more. What we're doing here is we're not dismissing objects and people, we're upgrading objects and people. It's what Pasolini, the filmmaker Pasolini, said of his films. I want to restore to reality its original sacred significance. That's what we're doing. To call this an object is to downgrade it. This is the infinite. Every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight enclosed by the five senses. Everything, every object is an immense world of delight enclosed by the five senses. It's not really a class. We're not dismissing it. We're upgrading it.
Beautiful.
We don't dismiss people by saying ultimately there are no people. That's not a nihilistic statement. On the contrary, we're upgrading. Each of us is the infinite one.